Three, two, one.
Wait, it's for you, right?
No, it's for you.
Oh, I thought we were still doing videos for you. Okay, that's fine.
No, this one is for you. No? That's
Okay.
fine. Hey guys, welcome to this new video. In today's video, we're gonna discuss about 5 pros and 5 cons about living in Vietnam as an expat. So we've been listing down a couple of things that we want to discuss in this video. So in each topic, we're going to give you our thoughts. So today I have my buddy Vin with me. Vin, you've been living in Vietnam for roughly 4 years, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Vin, the first about pros is the cost of living. So obviously, you know, it's going to be very easy to come here and then to have a budget of probably 1,000, 1,500 US dollar. When I just first arrived here, I was, didn't earn a lot. So with an online business, it was pretty convenient to have this cost of living. What about your first pros, Vin?
Yeah, I think likewise, mine would be the same as the low cost of living. It's very, very affordable, and the high quality of life you get in return. So as you mentioned, if you're single and you're young and you come to Vietnam, maybe about $1,000 for a budget, maybe $1,500 might be more manageable. That means your apartment, your rent, your food, going out, all of that, you have a high quality of life for about $1,500 a month.
So yeah, if you compare that quality of life that we can have here compared to the West, I guess it's pretty different, right? I mean, for my own compared to what I had in France, if you want the same lifestyle, and as you mentioned, Vin, quality of life, you will need a budget way more if you were living in the US.
Yes, I think you would expect about double almost just to have a similar lifestyle. And you wouldn't get all of the amenities, whereas in Vietnam, the food is so cheap, you can eat out every night, every other night, whereas in America, you were limited to maybe the weekend or once or twice a month, where most people would go out for dinner.
Okay, perfect. The second point I mentioned about pros, it's about the diversity. So when I talk about diversity, I would say diversity in terms of food. You know how Vietnamese cuisine is very rich, but also diversity of life you can get in Asia, and especially here in Vietnam. You can go to a 5-star hotel paying maybe $1.5 200 US dollar, and you can also book a very, very cheap homestay in the middle of nowhere, and then you can really have that good diversity. So cuisine, same, you can go to high-end restaurants, as well as you can have a bowl of nouilles for any kind of street food for $1.50. And also diversity in travel, diversity in experience that we can have in Vietnam because the country is so big. So that's my second pros I mentioned. What about yours, Vin?
It would be very similar. I said something about access to the beaches and to the food, amenities, and things like that. So I didn't think too much about what you said about the diversity in terms of the street food maybe costing $1, and then you said you can go to a buffet spending all the way from $100 to $200 US. So that's true also in Vietnam. You can get the high-end steaks, you can go get wine, cocktails, have a rooftop experience, and pay similar that you would pay in maybe Los Angeles or a big city. And then on the flip side, as you mentioned, you can get very, very cheap, what is that, juices, or Nuoc Mia, which is the sugarcane juice, or even coconut water for a mere 50 cents on the street. So very diverse and a big difference. But then for me, I guess the pro would be the access to the beach resorts, and like you said, you can go high end or low end and everything in between.
So you also mentioned about the service apartment that you can get, the very nice condominium, as well as you can just share a house with friends and paying maybe $15, $20 per day, and also going to very, very fancy hotel, right?
Yes, so if you're strapped for cash and you're young and you don't mind having roommates, you can spend maybe 200, 300 US dollars in for a room inside a house and with maybe 4 other roommates. So that's one way. Or you can even get a serviced apartment where we're living today. It might be a small studio or 1 bedroom for about 500 US dollars, but you get the serviced apartment 2 or 3 times a week. There might be a pool and a gym attached to that. And again, for 500 US dollars, that's unheard of in the US.
Now we come to the third pros that I mentioned. It's about the community. So here in Vietnam, we have a strong expat community, and we have also a lot of people just like you and me, people who have an online business, who are either having a physical day-to-day job, but on the side have this entrepreneurship mindset, are going to events, are going to networking gatherings like that. So you have a like-minded community that you can connect with, and then plenty of co-working spaces organizing different types of events. So for me, it's also one of the pros to be living in a city like Ho Chi Minh City, because in 1 year you can meet probably 10 times more people that you can meet if you are staying in your hometown in the West. Yeah, that's a pro that I point out specifically for Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, I agree. If you're into the making money online, entrepreneurship, small business, digital marketing, anything online business, I think Vietnam and specifically Saigon caters to that. As you mentioned, there's a few different events monthly, and as you also mentioned, you'll meet other expats and other foreigners that are doing the similar thing, and then you can mastermind with them, see how they're making money online and what their side hustle is, and then you, like you said, you see and meet people like that. Whereas if you stayed in your hometown, you might not have that mindset. People are probably just having a 9-to-5 job. They're working to pay off the rent, the car payment, and they're looking for the future of buying a home maybe, but they're not thinking of something like what we see today.
Okay, Vin, the third point that you also mentioned or as the pros is the ease and accessibility of food services. Can you talk about that?
Yes, Saigon, Vietnam is amazing. It's so convenient living. Back in America, we're usually in a small town or a suburb where you have to drive and things close at 9 p.m. You might have to order some food. Whereas in Vietnam, everything is in proximity. You can go walk a couple blocks to get your banh mi, your pho, beef noodle soup, or any types of street food very, very conveniently. Or if you want to stay in, you can call a Grab, which is a service that they come to your house delivery. And you can get food for very, very cheap deliveries, maybe $1 US delivered to your door. So it's amazing.
So actually, Vin, that third pros that you mentioned, how things are very convenient and very easy to get access to, is linked to my fourth pros about living in Vietnam as an expat, is how everything is very easy. When I talk about easy, is people are very friendly, so it's very easy to connect and to meet a bunch of people around you. It can be locals and as well as expats. It's also very easy to settle a second home. So if you come here for a couple of months, maybe you want to travel the region, all Southeast Asia, but you would also like to find a base, a place where you can again feel at home, far from your home country. So it's also a very good place to come here to probably find an apartment that you can rent for 3-6 months by paying a little bit premium compared to long-term rental. And it's also very easy for the transportation, right? As you mentioned, the Grab app, you can easily travel inside the city and also commute outside of Saigon. You can easily take a bus, a sleeping bus from Saigon to Dalat. It can cost you probably $15 US. If you want to go to Vung Tau, to Nha Trang, it's the same. You have different options to travel outside by bus, by train as well. So that is for me a very good pro that Vietnam is having.
Yeah, let me touch upon two of those issues. So first, you've got the housing. It's so affordable to get in and out of an apartment, right? All you need to do is maybe sign a lease, and then it's just a few $100s a month. Maybe are averaging about $500 US a month. You might have to pay a deposit, and then you can find a 6 months or 1 year or even a few months, and that's about it. Whereas in America, in order to get long-term housing, you have to provide like your work history, where you rented before, and you might have put on a 2-month deposit, and they want to do a background check to make sure you're not a criminal. So it's very, it's more challenging. It's more of a hassle. Whereas in Vietnam, it's so easy. They don't ask any of that. They might check your passport, but that's about it. So you can go to any place in Vietnam and find a very affordable apartment, no questions asked, as long as you're just paying your monthly rent. And then about transportation, as you mentioned, Guillaume, that's what makes Vietnam great too, is because anywhere you go, whether it's a bus trip or a train ride, it's usually $8, $10 one way. So it's very, very affordable to go to the surrounding communities around Saigon. So even a flight to Da Nang or a flight from Saigon to another destination an hour away might be 25, 40, 50 US dollars one way. So very, very affordable.
The fourth point that you mentioned, Vin, as a pros is also the diversity in food, but not only Vietnamese food. You touch also the point of all the diversity that we have here in terms of Asian cuisine, in terms of Western cuisine. Can you mention some of the nice places that you like to go, or at least experience that you have to have in terms of diversity of food?
Yes. So I think Saigon and Vietnam in general is getting better with international foods. And for example, pizza, there are a few places you can go to, but it seems like they're growing every year. But there's Jimmy's New York style pizza that I really like, as well as Four Peas Pizza. I think they make the best pizza in town. And then there's a bunch of hamburger places too. So you can get a typical hamburger you can get in America that tastes very, very similar to in the West too. So there's Fat Cat Kitchen that we ate at before. There's Mekong Merchant, which is an upscale restaurant in Tao Dien, another nice place. And Saigon Outcast also has decent burgers and other types of food. So in terms of diversity in international foods, Vietnam has it, whether it be Japanese, Korean barbecue, French restaurants, so you can go high-end and get Argentinian steaks. You can get Spanish tapas. Maybe not as readily available everywhere, but you can still find it in the city, and that's what makes living in Saigon amazing.
Okay. Now we come to the fifth point as a pro of living in Vietnam as an expat. It's about travel, and actually here we point to the same thing. Is like when you are based in Ho Chi Minh City, let's say you rent here an apartment for a long period of time, and if you have this mindset of exploring the neighboring regions, it's pretty easy to get almost direct flight from any place, right? You can have direct flight to Phuket in Thailand, to Chiang Mai, similar to Hong Kong, to Singapore. I mean, it's very diverse, the flight and then the diversity that you have around. So you can easily mix and understand and learn about all the culture. Asian obviously would be easier to reach, but you can also take a direct flight to Europe if you want to come back. So that's easy way to commute around is a pro that I point about Vietnam.
Yes, that's a great pro of being based in Vietnam. Just in the last 4 years, I've been to South Korea, Shanghai, Chiang Mai, Bangkok, and Bali, and maybe a couple other places. But that's my backyard, so I fly for a few $100 US, and I'm in another city, another country, very exotic, very, very different. So that's what makes living and being based in Saigon in particular, because we're Southeast Asia, we're surrounded by all those countries.
Okay, so now you see we just listed the 5 pros that we both almost mutually share about living in Vietnam as an expat. Now I want to discuss a little bit about the cons, because obviously each country has their own pros and their own cons, and it's important also to point out for the people who are considering moving here, either short-term or either long-term, what's the downside, the disadvantage of living in a big city like Saigon or in general in Vietnam. The first cons that I point out is the pollution. So Saigon can be polluted. We know even if it's super windy, sometimes the pollution can be pushed away, but it's sure that some morning we wake up and then we don't see more than 2 kilometers, right? There are some high towers that we cannot see. It's also polluted just in terms of the food. Sometimes we don't know so much about the quality. Some food has been picked from local markets, so the freshness on some food in some areas may not be the best. And finally, the last point is polluted in terms of noise as well. If you are someone who like to be in a quiet environment, don't choose to be living in a place like Ho Chi Minh City, or choose a very far district like you can go to District 9, to District 7. Over there, you will find a more quiet environment. Even here in Tao Dien, the place you are living here and that neighborhood is pretty quiet, so you can easily go out, walk, take your bicycle, but it's just 5% of the whole Saigon that will be quiet. The other are very, very bustling, very busy. So that's one of the cons that we have about living in Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, so for my cons, it would be the same thing. Noise and air pollution would be the top of the list, and then the traffic, because we're living in a city of 10 million people. There's cars and traffic jams mostly during the afternoon and then evenings. So that's a big, big problem. And that also produces the pollution that we see, the air pollution and the noise pollution in terms of construction, because it seems like there's a big construction boom everywhere in Vietnam, whether you're in Da Nang, Nha Trang, or Saigon. There's buildings going up, and there's always construction going on. So that's probably the top of the list is the noise and air pollution, and then traffic for me.
Now, the second cons that we have about living in Vietnam as an expat is that there is no proper long-term visa. At least it's not easy to get visas just like other countries in the region. Let's say in Thailand, you can easily get a 5-year visa as the elite visa. You have also the retirement visa options in Cambodia, in Thailand, and in other countries. In Vietnam right now, it's not something that is available. So the only options that foreigners have is to find a job or to invest, and they can get long-term visa, but again it's not really straightforward. You have to have a company that you'll be working for. So for people who have who are young, who are running an online business, for instance, or people who are in the retirement age, they cannot easily settle in Vietnam long-term.
Yes. So the visa issues, it's getting worse. As you know, maybe a year or two ago when they started to crack down and change the visa rules. Well, so prior, before, it was easier to get a business visa, travel every 3 months, and then re-enter. But now we're only seeing a 30-day, and then you have to exit and then come back for another 30 days. So the current restrictions now are making it very difficult for people to stay, whether you're a digital nomad, etc.
Okay, Vin, the first cons that you mentioned also is that everything is on black and is not white. Can you explain a little bit that?
Yeah, unlike the West in America where I come from, Vietnam has unspoken rules and regulations, whether it be starting a business or maybe constructing an apartment building or anything like that, or you're entering some kind of contract or you're buying something. It seems like the rules aren't laid out very clearly, whereas in America, there's rules, there's regulations, and then if something happens to you, there's the law, the rule of law, where you can go to an attorney. There's channels where you can, there's the Better Business Bureau where you can make a complaint to businesses that you feel that you're getting scammed or ripped off. So there's protections there. So I don't worry as much, whereas in Vietnam, you don't have that backing. So if you get into business, you sign contracts, or you make big purchases or something like that, it's not as clear. You know, the rules could change quickly. I mean, if you're renting a warehouse, they might say one thing today, or you sign a contract and they change it later. So you don't have the protections. Who are you going to run to? Local police might not help you. Maybe if they want your help, or if you want their help, you might have to have some coffee money or some extra hurdles to go through.
So I totally agree with Vin on that point, and that leads to the second cons of living in Vietnam is that everything is not clear, everything is not straightforward, and specifically regulation are changing very fast. So as Vin point out, sometimes you are doing something, you are thinking you are going on the right way, and finally because the policy is going to change, you have to adjust. You have always to be updated about the new rules. So that's something that we have here, as well as the bureaucracy and then the red tape. If you want to settle long-term in Vietnam, you have to deal with immigration. You have to deal with, for instance, investment department if you are investing in Vietnam. Sometimes it's not that easy to go there because of the language barrier, because here we are very used to deal with accountant, to deal with the tax office, with lawyers, to deal with the immigration departments, and to deal with visa agent, to deal with immigrations as well. So it doesn't make everything super smooth. So that's one cons that I point out about Vietnam. And about that second point, Vin, you listed that in Vietnam we have to be aware about scam. Can you develop that?
Yeah, so this is like the third con about living in Vietnam. There are much more scams and going on in Vietnam. So I feel like I have to have my guard up, whether getting the taxi or if I buy something on the streets or if someone approaches me. I'm not too sure if I can trust that person. I think that they're trying to scam me into something. And so that could be taking my money or playing a trick on me, or it could even be petty theft, right? I have to be more aware of my belongings, whether it's my camera, my bag, or my bicycle, or maybe my motor scooter. You know, if I'm out and about, I have to be aware of where those things are. So those are some of the things and issues I have to think about. Whereas when back in America, I feel like when I'm talking to someone in the street, even in Minneapolis or Chicago, what they tell me is the truth. I might ask, like, do you know where this route is or this highway? How do I get there? They'll tell me. I'll believe them. Whereas in Vietnam, I'm not sure if they're telling me the truth or if there's something behind what they're trying to tell me. So in that sense, I don't feel as safe, and I can't trust everyone that I run into in Vietnam.
Okay, so I agree that sometimes in Vietnam you may have petty thief, you may have small crimes like that, so you have to be aware about taking your phone out on the streets, for instance, is basic advice, but it's very often that expats have their phone stolen and snatched directly on the streets. I won't say that it's not safe to be in Vietnam, because I know I have some friend girls, they have been traveling alone in all Vietnam, and they share me always about mostly good experience, but in all countries you have to watch out, and especially in a big city like Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, there will be small kids trying to snatch your phone. So it's something that is there. The 4 points that I point out about the cons, Vin, as someone foreigner living in Vietnam, is about the language barrier. I've been studying Vietnamese, but still after 4 months studying, it was very hard for me to really being able to communicate deeply with locals. So every time when I had to do a more long conversation, I had to switch to English. So for you have VietQ, so you have another perspective about this. But for my own understanding, if you don't have any background of Vietnamese before coming here, you need at least 1 year and a half to be really focused on learning Vietnamese, but more than that, it's also learning the slang, learning the vocabulary that they have here in the South compared to the North. So it's something you have to take into consideration if you consider living here in long term, at least 1 year and a half to focus on learning the language if you want to master it and being able to walk and being able to talk outside of the big cities to locals. What's your perspective about this, Vin?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's quite challenging for everyone. Even though I'm VietQ, I do speak Vietnamese. My language ability is about maybe 40-50%. It depends on the situation. I can get by the day-to-day basic things, but then if you put me into speaking to a lawyer or speaking to a police officer or maybe a more formal setting, then it gets more difficult because they're using words that I've never studied. They're more comprehensive, more complex words and kind of notion and things like that. So for me, it's difficult too. I struggle with it, and definitely it's not easy. And I think if you're living here long term, like you said, Guillaume, it's to your advantage to start to learn as much as possible. I think it does help, and but it is a frustration, something you might have to deal with if you do decide to live long term in Vietnam.
Okay, now we come to the fifth cons about living in Vietnam, and here what I point out is more for families, so family with kids. Let's say you come here with an expat position, you're going to work in District 1, you're going to probably live in Tao Dien. You can here here rent quite easily very nice housing, but in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, it's going to be pretty costly. So I'm not saying that the healthcare is always bad. If you go to very private clinic, you can have very good treatment. The doctor sometimes speak French, English, Japanese, etc. So you can still get access to good care, good health care. But you need to have on the side health insurance. And then when it's about education, I heard that here, if you want to put your kids in school, it's going to be very costly. So I have my perspective about this because schooling in France is free. So for me, it's normal to have something free when we talk about schooling. Your perspective may be a little bit different, Vince, about that. So do you have any feedback about schooling and education in Vietnam?
Yeah, I agree there too, because in America we have the public school system, which is free through grade school, middle school, and high school, and then you have private school, which might be religious affiliated, Catholic or Christian, or just a private school, which costs money and it's quite expensive. But that's one downfall in Vietnam, is if you do have a family and you have some kids that you want to send to private schools, it's very, very expensive. We're talking, I think tuition's $20,000-$30,000 US. So on par of what you'd pay for an elite private high school in America, you'd have to pay in Saigon. So depending on your income, your salary, you may or may not be able to afford that, and you might not have many other options. So that's the biggest complaint I hear from expat families, is the education here is extremely expensive.
Okay, thanks, Vin, for that additional information. So let's recap the 5 pros and cons about living in Vietnam. In number 1 pros, we have cost of living. We have the diversity that you can have in terms of lifestyle, in terms of experience, in terms of food that you have here. You have in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, a very strong expat community, like-minded people, plenty of events, so very good to meet up other peoples who have this entrepreneurship mindset. It's also very easy to settle in big cities, Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, Hanoi, or just travel within the country for a couple of months here. Then about the cons, we have the pollution. That is a very big problem, very big issue in Vietnam. It's not easy to get long-term visa if you don't have the right situation here, either working here, being an investor, or being married to a local. You cannot reach that long-term visa. In terms of bureaucracy, red tape, paperwork, it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes to deal with the authorities. And then we have the language barrier that you and me are still struggling sometimes in specific situation. And then education and schooling for kids is expensive. So if you have or if you are planning to have babies or kids here in Vietnam, get ready, because as soon as you will be into the schooling aspect, it may be costly. You have a final word, Vin, for the audience?
I think the other pro I forgot is, if you do start a business, you can hire people very, very affordably. So we're talking fresh graduate, $300 US a month. For a mid-level, someone like an accounting background that's 25 years old, 28 years old, maybe $500 US a month. So that's another pro, is if you do come to Vietnam and you're thinking of starting a small business, you can hire locals for very, very cheap.
Yeah, totally agree with Vin about that. If you are considering coming to Vietnam to set up an entity, either you're already having a business overseas, or you want to enter the Vietnamese market with an ID, with a franchise product, or things like that, it's quite easy to have and to build a team here in Ho Chi Minh City. Usually those kids somehow who are 25 years old, 22, 25, they are very hungry and willing to work for foreign people. So this is also a very good point that you mentioned about that. If you want to learn more about that topic, feel free to go below in the description and to download my ebook that is called The 7 Mistakes That I Made in Vietnam, and especially I discuss about the entrepreneurship and then the investment field. Thanks, Vin, for your insight today, sharing about the pros and cons about living in Vietnam as an expat. If you enjoy the video, leave a thumbs up, and I see you in the next video.
Thanks, Guillaume.
Thanks, bye.
down and I'ma get it right. Get on sight like